All right, coffee lovers, get ready because today we're diving deep into something that might just revolutionize your morning routine.
Oh, and what's that? Spill the beans.
We're talking water temperature, specifically the surprising benefits of using cold water in your coffee maker.
You mean instead of hot, like starting with cold?
You got it. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but this article from Coffee at Corner, which is all about maximizing flavor, especially for iced coffee, argues that cold water could be the secret to unlocking a whole new level of deliciousness in your cup.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
Most people just assume, hot water equals hot coffee, case closed.
Right. But it turns out the temperature of the water you start with can seriously impact how those flavors extract.
And ultimately, what ends up in your cup?
Exactly. So the article claims that cold water actually draws out more flavor from the beans. I'm curious, how does that work?
It's all about the science of extraction. Picture this. Hot water, it's like a whirlwind rushing through the coffee grounds, grabbing whatever it can in a hurry.
So it's not very discerning. Not really. This can lead to what we call over-extraction, where you get a lot of bitterness and acidity because those compounds just dissolve super quickly in hot water.
Makes sense. So it's like the hot water is grabbing everything in sight, the good and the bad, without any finesse.
Precisely. Now, cold water, on the other hand, is much more patient. It moves through the grounds slowly, like a gentle stroll.
So it's more selective.
Exactly. This slower extraction allows those delicate, nuanced flavors, those fruity and floral notes, more time to dissolve.
So I end up with a more complex and smoother cup.
You got it. Plus, it means those bitter compounds, the ones that give you that harsh, acidic taste, well, they have less of a chance to dissolve.
So you're naturally getting a sweeter and mellower brew.
That's the beauty of it.
Wow, this is already making me rethink my entire coffee routine. Now, the article also mentions something about cold water preserving the freshness of the beans. I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure thing. When coffee beans come into contact with oxygen, they start to oxidize, and that can lead to stale flavors. Oh, I see. So it's like they're going bad faster.
You could say that. Hot water brewing exposes the beans to more air throughout the process, whereas cold water brewing limits that exposure.
Okay, that makes sense. So with cold water, I'm getting more flavor, more freshness, and a smoother, less acidic cup.
You got it. You're hitting all the high notes.
This is amazing.
Ah,
But what about iced coffee specifically? The article seemed to emphasize that cold water was especially beneficial for those who prefer their coffee cold.
right. There are a couple of key advantages for iced coffee lovers. First, remember how we talked about that slower extraction with cold water?
Uh-huh.
Well, that also means the grounds have more time to take up space in the filter basket. They don't pack down as tightly, so you can fit more in.
So you end up with a larger batch.
Precisely. More iced coffee goodness to enjoy.
That's awesome. But what about the taste? There's a perception that cold brew is always overly sweet, isn't there?
Yeah, that's a common misconception. Cold brewing doesn't make the coffee sweeter. It just lets those natural sugars shine through.
Without being overpowered by the bitterness.
Exactly. So you get a more balanced flavor profile, not necessarily a sweeter one.
It's more about highlighting what's already there, not adding something artificial.
You nailed it. And speaking of bringing out the best in your beans, let's talk about tamping.
Ooh, yes, the article mentioned it, but I'd love to hear more about how tamping actually impacts the flavor.
Think of it as gently pressing down on those coffee grounds in the filter basket before you start brewing. It's like creating a more even playground for the water to flow through.
Okay, that makes sense.
This ensures all those grounds are extracted evenly, resulting in a smoother, more consistent cup, less bitterness, whether you're using hot or cold water.
So it's like a pre-brew massage for the coffee grounds to coax out those delicious flavors.
I like that analogy. Now let's get back to the water itself for a moment. The article mentioned that hot water lacks dissolved oxygen and that this somehow affects the flavor. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
So dissolved oxygen is like a VIP guest at the coffee flavor party. When you heat water, a lot of that oxygen, it kind of says, see ya later.
It makes a quick exit.
It does. And that affects how those flavor compounds extract, often leading to a less nuanced, maybe even a flatter taste.
Interesting. So cold water is holding on to more of that dissolved oxygen.
You bet. This allows for a more complete and vibrant extraction of those delicate flavor molecules.
Wow. So it's not just about temperature, it's about the chemistry of the water itself.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And it highlights how even subtle tweaks in your brewing process can make a huge difference in the final cup. Speaking of subtle differences, we should talk about the impact water temperature has on the acidity of your coffee.
That's something I've always wondered about. Does cold water actually make coffee less acidic?
It does. Cold water extraction tends to minimize the release of those harsh, bitter compounds that contribute to acidity.
So it's a gentler process overall.
Exactly. You end up with a smoother, less acidic cup when you start with cold water.
This is blowing my mind. I had no idea the temperature of the water could have such a huge impact in so many ways.
It's one of those things that's often overlooked, but it can make a world of difference. And believe it or not, there are even benefits beyond flavor when it comes to using cold water in your coffee maker.
Okay, now you've really piqued my interest. What else can cold water do?
Have you ever thought about the cleanliness of your coffee maker? Using cold water can actually help prevent the growth of bacteria and mold inside your machine.
Really? I've got to admit that's not something I've ever considered before.
Well, it's worth thinking about. Hot water, especially if it sits in the coffee maker for a while, can become a breeding ground for those unwelcome guests.
So cold water keeps things a bit more sterile.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It creates a less hospitable environment so your coffee maker stays cleaner and your coffee tastes fresher.
That's definitely a bonus, especially since I'm maybe not as diligent about cleaning my coffee maker as I should be. So, to recap, we've talked about how cold water can create a more flavorful, fresher, smoother, and even healthier cup of coffee.
And don't forget, this isn't just about iced coffee. These benefits apply whether you're brewing hot or cold.
That's fantastic. We've covered so much in this first part of our deep dive. I feel like I'm already a more informed coffee enthusiast. We'll be right back to delve even deeper into the world of cold water brewing. Stay tuned. Welcome back, coffee lovers. That first part was incredible. I had no idea water temperature could have such a big impact on so many things.
Right. It's like a secret weapon for unlocking amazing coffee at home.
Absolutely. Now, in the last part, we talked about how cold water leads to a smoother, less acidic cup. I'm curious, can you break down the science behind that a bit more?
Sure. Remember how we talked about hot water extracting things more quickly? Well, that can lead to over-extracting certain acids, like chlorogenic acid, which is known for being bitter. Cold water, with its slower approach, minimizes that.
So it's not just about extracting less overall, but extracting specific compounds differently.
You got it. It's like cold water allows us to be more selective about what ends up in the cup.
That's fascinating. And makes me wonder, is there an ideal water to coffee ratio for cold brewing to make sure we're getting that perfect balance?
There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but a good starting point is 1.8, 1 part coffee to 8 parts water. But like with most things coffee, experimentation is key.
So adjust it based on your own taste and the beans you're using. If you like a bolder cup, use a bit more coffee, right?
Exactly. That's what makes coffee so fun. It's a journey, and every cup can be different.
Speaking of unique experiences, the article also mentioned high-altitude coffee beans and how they tend to make a better cup. Why is that?
High-altitude beans, they're special. Because they grow slower in those mountainous regions, the beans have more time to develop those complex flavors.
So they're soaking up all the goodness of their environment for longer.
That's a great way to put it. That unique environment gives them a richer, more nuanced flavor. It's no wonder they're so popular.
It really makes you appreciate the journey those beans go through, right?
It does. From the farm to our cup, it's quite a process.
This has been so enlightening. I feel like I'm really starting to understand coffee in a whole new way.
That's what we love to hear. Empowering coffee lovers with knowledge and helping them explore all the possibilities.
Well, you've definitely done that. We've covered so much in this second part, from those specific acids to the magic of high-altitude beans. I'm excited to hear what else we'll uncover in the final part.
We've got some great takeaways coming up, and I'll leave you with a question to ponder as you continue your coffee journey. Stay tuned for the final part.
All right, coffee aficionados, we're back for the final chapter of our cold water brewing exploration. I have to say, my mind is officially blown.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about something we often take for granted, right?
Absolutely. We've uncovered the science, the benefits, even the potential pitfalls. Now I'm ready for the actionable advice. Where do we go from here?
Well, the best way to really understand cold water brewing is to, actually try it. And the good news is you don't need any fancy equipment.
That's good to hear because I'm all about simplicity in the kitchen.
Exactly. Something like a French press works great, or even just a mason jar. The key is to use a coarser grind, similar to what you'd use for a French press with hot water.
Okay, I can handle that. And remind me again why that coarser grind is so important.
Because we're talking about a much longer extraction time, that coarser grind is going to prevent over-extraction.
Which would make it bitter.
Yeah, you don't want that. It's all about a slow, gentle release of those flavors.
So, like we talked about before, balance is key. And I remember you mentioned a 1.8 water to coffee ratio as a starting point.
Right, but again, feel free to play around with that.
Yeah.
Everyone's taste is different, and different beans will react differently too.
That's what makes coffee so exciting. You can really make it your own. Now, are there any downsides to cold brewing we should be aware of before we dive in?
The main thing is that it does require a bit more patience.
Not exactly instant gratification.
Not quite. You'll want to plan ahead because that coffee needs time to steep, usually around 12 to 24 hours.
Okay, so good things come to those who wait.
Exactly. And trust me, it's worth the wait. Smooth, flavorful, less acidic, and let's not forget about that bonus of potentially keeping your coffee maker cleaner.
No more moldy coffee makers. That's definitely a win. So we've gone from the science to the benefits to the practical tips. I feel like I've leveled up my coffee knowledge for sure.
I think we've all gained a new appreciation for the art and science of coffee, and that's what it's all about.
Now, I can't let you go without that final thought-provoking question you promised us. What wisdom are you leaving us with?
Well, we've talked a lot about hot versus cold water, right? But what if we think beyond those two extremes? How might experimenting with different temperatures, maybe somewhere in between, unlock new flavors in those beans we love? There could be a whole spectrum of taste waiting to be discovered.
Now, that is a question worth pondering. It makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden in those coffee beans, just waiting for the right temperature to reveal them.
The beauty of coffee is that the exploration never really ends.
So true. Well, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of cold water brewing. I hope everyone listening is feeling inspired to get